The CallMeEzekiel summer collection is out now. Get your favorite designs on premium t-shirts and the brand new CallMeEzekiel sticker. What's that? It's already August and summer is almost over? I don't want to talk about it. The collection is 10% off until the end of August. Link is in the description. Ah, what a lovely day to be an American merchant sailing the Atlantic. Do you hear something? Good day, Yanks. We're checking for British deserters. Please say peace. Peas. That's funny. Say it again. Peas. That sounded like peace. You're British. Come on, he clearly said peas. It's too late for that. In fact, I'd best take both of you, just for good measure. That's outrageous! We're American citizens! Well, my maps haven't been updated since 1663. So as far as I'm concerned, you're Dutch. What? Now to mark your new allegiances. Ah! For your first mission, you're going to help us deliver weapons to our native allies in the Ohio. But those weapons will be used to kill our countrymen. Good point. If you get captured, say you're Dutch. It's the perfect cover. Just you wait until Congress hears about this. Ho ho ho, I like this one. For talking back, only beat him within an inch of his life. And how about me? Death. Aww. When America's founding fathers implemented their Constitution of 1788, they had high hopes for their new republic. Most envisioned a free nation, led by educated, rational gentlemen farmers like themselves, chosen by a thin electorate of property owners. Their almost aristocratic republic was to be free from political parties and the geopolitical squabbles of Europe. But the nation the founders promised, and the one they created, turned out to be two very different beasts. The limited franchise did not primarily empower the enlightened agriculturalists of the founders' imaginations, but New England's wealthy merchant oligarchy. These men were not interested in farming and philosophy, so much as commerce, stability, and a strong central government upheld by the limited franchise that empowered them. Meanwhile, along the nation's frontiers to the south and west, uneducated, unsophisticated, and passionate settlers thrived. Exactly the kind of folk the founders were trying to keep out of power. Yet, aside from wanting to broaden the franchise, they believed more in the founders' vision than the elites the founders had empowered. This split was reflected in the two major political parties that rose to dominate the nation's government. The Federalists, who represented America's commercial elites concentrated in New England, and the Democratic Republicans, whose platform of agrarianism, limited central government, and eventually expanding the franchise appealed to the country's disenfranchised settlers. America's parties couldn't even agree on foreign policy. The Federalists traded heavily with the United Kingdom, which they admired for its stability and constitutional government. But the Democratic Republicans hated the British. The party's frontier constituents blamed them for arming the Native Americans, with whom they were virtually at war. They would come to idealize revolutionary France as a comrade in their struggle for democracy and a partner against Great Britain. Even as political parties slowly chiseled away at America's founding vision, foreign affairs were about to take a sledgehammer to them. What would become of the United States if that foundation were shattered completely? Who would be left to pick up the pieces? King George, sire, you have to come out now. No! Your Majesty! No! Ugh, he's been acting like such a child since his madness. I guess we'll just have to treat him like one. Sire, what happened? I am the king! I don't have to shave if I don't want to! We can't possibly present him like this. I have a solution. What is it? It's this video's sponsor. What's a video? The one, no, the only, don't you dare, Quality Time Beard Shaping Template Kit. I'm telling Parliament about this! Please allow me to take just over a minute of your time to tell you about today's sponsor, the Quality Time Beard Shaping Template Kit. It has the 2 guides you need to skip the expensive trip to the barber and shape your facial hair yourself from the comfort and convenience of your own home. The Beard Guide lets you shape your facial hair in 4 distinct styles, and with the Beard Neckline Shaper's convenient adjustable straps, it'll be easier to keep your neck hairs in check. No one will be able to call you a neckbeard. Both guides are one-size-fits-all, easy to use with both electric and traditional razors, and the durable materials mean they're built to last. Don't settle for a cheap knockoff. Quality Time designs, manufactures, and assembles everything in the USA. So join over 100,000 Quality Time customers and get your Quality Time Beard Shaping Template Kit via the link in the description and pinned comment. And get 15% off your order with our exclusive code Ezekiel1. Doing so also helps show Quality Time how awesome they are for sponsoring free history videos like this one. Isn't that much better, sire? Fine. There they are! They've gone mad talking about things like videos, electric razors, and great deals on men's facial hair care products! The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars added a new dimension to America's political divide. American merchants were intercepted by French and British warships for trying to trade with their rivals. And the British, desperate for experienced sailors, went as far as to impress American sailors into the Royal Navy, usually under the false pretense that they were British citizens and deserters. But there were some people the Royal Navy hated even more than alleged deserters, a group so despised by the international community that they're afforded no protections under maritime law. Unsubscribed viewers. Subscribed viewers work hard for this channel, traversing the world's oceans to secure favorable trade deals for our growing community, and they're getting sick of the unsubscribed viewers freeloading. As we speak, the subscribed viewers are forming press gangs to force them to contribute. So this is your last chance, unsubscribed viewers. Click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell right now, or we're going to impress you into the Royal Navy. Ironically, it was the Democratic Republicans who seemed most outraged by the Impressment issue. They viewed it as a slight against America's national honor, and a useful tool to damage Great Britain's reputation in the country. The Federalists, meanwhile, tried looking the other way, even though it was their constituents who were most affected. The Federalists had to maintain good relations with the United Kingdom for the sake of trade. They were also suspicious that what the Democratic Republicans really wanted was war. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson was elected America's first Democratic Republican president. As the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence and founded the party, his ideological bona fides were impeccable. Yet not even Jefferson could uphold those ideals in the face of political reality. In 1803, Jefferson led Congress in going beyond their constitutional limits by buying the Louisiana Territory from Napoleonic France. Between 1801 and 1805, Jefferson sent the U.S. Navy, which he never really trusted, to suppress the Barbary pirates in North Africa. And, most significant of all, Jefferson led the Democratic Republicans in passing the 1807 Embargo Act. Here's the Embargo Act for you to sign, President Jefferson. But can you remind me who it's against again? Are we embargoing the British? That'll sure punish them for arming the natives and kidnapping our citizens. Is it France? An unexpected move from Democratic Republicans like ourselves, but a bold statement for international law and stability. Could it even be the Dutch? By God, it's about time somebody showed those clog-wearing, windmill-building bastards a lesson. Actually, Secretary of State and future President James Madison, it's none of them. Then who are we embargoing? Isn't it obvious? Ourselves, of course! The 1807 Embargo Act banned all foreign trade to and from the United States, an incredible departure from the democratic Republican principles of free trade and limited government. Though that pill was much easier to swallow given how the fallout mostly hit their commercial Federalist enemies. That same year, an American and Royal Navy vessel exchanged fire off the coast of Virginia. In 1809, Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, was elected to succeed him as president. Madison reopened trade with every country except England and France. But in 1810, Congress went against Madison's wishes by passing Macon's Bill No. 2. This law reopened British and French trade for 3 months, and promised that if either power didn't interfere with it, the Americans would embargo their rival. President Madison already knew what was going to happen. The French emperor exploited the bill by promising to comply. When the British failed to do the same, Madison was forced to embargo them. Not only did Napoleon inflame tensions between the US and his British rivals, the French emperor had effectively added the United States to his continental system, the Europe-wide and now transatlantic embargo of the United Kingdom. As for America's trade, Napoleon just continued harassing it anyway. As Anglo-American relations continued to break down, a new faction rose within the Democratic-Republican Party. The Federalist press dubbed them the Warhawks. These were young, ambitious politicians who believed force was the best way to deal with Great Britain. Though they did well in the 1810 elections, the Federalists and most Democratic Republicans, including President Madison, still preferred a peaceful solution. But as they waited, grievances continued to mount. Along America's northwest frontier, the charismatic Shawnee chief Tecumseh united the tribes into a confederation to resist American encroachment, and encouraged other tribes along America's frontier to lead their own resistance efforts. The British saw Tecumseh's confederacy as a lovely way to check American expansion, so provided him with weapons and sought to woo him into an alliance. But before that could happen, Indiana's governor, William Henry Harrison, launched a preemptive strike, soundly defeating Tecumseh's forces at Tippecanoe in November 1811. When British-made muskets were found on the battlefield, the Democratic Republicans were outraged. That same year, US and Royal Navy ships clashed for the second time near North Carolina. And, in early 1812, American diplomats confirmed that the British were unwilling to enter talks to resolve their issues. These events gave the Warhawks the political and popular support they needed to force President Madison's hands, who now had to worry about re-election in October. On June 1, 1812, the president addressed Congress declaring his support for war. On the 12th, Congress narrowly voted in favor. For the first time in American history, the country formally declared war on a foreign power. And for the second time, it was at war with Great Britain. News of the declaration only intensified America's divides. Not a single Federalist voted for the conflict. Opposition protests broke out in New England, while Democratic Republican strongholds like Baltimore and New Orleans saw mobs attack and sometimes kill anyone caught speaking out against the war. For a party so hell-bent on going to war, the Democratic Republicans did remarkably little to prepare for it. In fact, their ideological distrust of standing armies meant they had shrunk the already small Army and Navy down to just 6,000 men and 6 so-called ships of the line, which any other power would have called frigates. They also stuffed the officer corps with their own largely unqualified men. Their government only voted to expand the army to 35,000 soldiers a few days before the declaration of war, promising to pay them with land out west. How then did the Democratic Republicans expect to defeat the United Kingdom, which boasted an army of over 250,000 men and a Royal Navy with more than 500 warships? Well, America still had a few advantages. Most British armies and fleets were busy engaging Napoleon in Europe. The US Navy could be supplemented with privateers to raid British shipping. And, most significant of all, as a frontier society with a strong citizen-soldier tradition, America's population was remarkably well armed and organized into state militias totaling almost 500,000 men. America's plan was to rapidly mobilize the militias and use them to overwhelm British Canada before reinforcements could arrive from Europe. It was hoped that Canada would welcome the Americans as liberators, and that the quick victory would be enough to force the British to the negotiating table without a protracted war. No one seemed to care that Canada's population included many loyalists who'd fled bloodthirsty patriot reprisals during the Revolution, or that the Quebecois were relatively content with British rule. Nor did it bother any of the Democratic Republican leadership that most of the militia they were calling up along Canada's border were from anti-war New England. Revolutionary War veteran General Hull was called up to lead an army of roughly 2,000 men from Fort Detroit in the Northwest and invade Upper Canada. Fellow Revolutionary fossil General Henry Dearborn was made senior commander in the North and placed in overall command of the other three armies between 2,000 and 5,000 men each. Their objectives were Montreal, disrupting the St. Lawrence River Valley, and seizing the corridor between Lakes Erie and Ontario. Commanding Canada's defenses was British General Isaac Brock. He knew exactly what kind of war he was about to fight, so prepared to lead the British garrison, Canadian militias, and their native allies in delaying the Americans until reinforcements arrived from Europe. Brock also secured the much sought-after alliance with Tecumseh's Confederacy. It would contribute around 1,000 native troops led by Tecumseh himself, eager to avenge their defeat at Tippecanoe. How the Democratic Republicans felt about the situation was best exemplified by Thomas Jefferson, when he said, "The acquisition of Canada this year will be a mere matter of marching." On July 2nd, 1812, British forces stationed in Fort Amherstburg along the Maumee River captured the American schooner Cayuga, carrying essential supplies and General Hull's invasion plans. Hull sent the vessel past the fort assuming the British hadn't gotten the declaration of war yet. Whoops. Incredibly, neither that, nor being a Revolutionary War relic were Hull's biggest problems. Rather, his biggest issue was a certain phobia of his. General Hull, sir, have you heard the latest news about India? Ah! No, not the Native Americans. The Indian subcontinent of Asia the British are fighting over. Oh, thank God. Sir, here's the new lieutenant Congress sent us. He's from the West Indies. Ah! What? No, not the Western Native Americans. I'm talking about the West Indies Islands in the Caribbean. Oh, thank God. Sir, we just got a dispatch from the Indiana Territory. Ah! Sir, not the territory of the Indians, the United States Territory of Indiana. You need to listen better. You know what, Captain? You're right. I'm going to carefully assess each situation before panicking, and not make silly mistakes like mixing up different kinds of Indians. Thus, on July 11th, 1812, our courageous General Hull bravely led his men into British territory. There, he was disappointed by the lack of local support, ran out of supplies, and got spooked when one of his reinforcement columns got ambushed by native troops, so even more bravely led his men back across the border. Then, on the 17th, Fort Mackinac, way up in northern Michigan, surrendered to the British. Unaware the war had broken out, they panicked when a combined British native force sent by Brock arrived and fired a single warning shot. Even after these victories, Brock didn't have the strength to beat Hull and Fort Detroit, so he tried deception instead. All right, General Brock, what's this meeting about? Welcome, General Hull. I requested you here to deliver a warning. As you know, many Indians have joined my army. If we should come to blows and you're defeated, I can't promise I'll be able to hold them back from committing a massacre. Psh, I'm not afraid of a bunch of mopes from Mysore. What? I don't mean Indians from India. I mean real American Indians. Well, I'm not afraid of a bunch of crooks from the Caribbean either. What? I'm not talking about people from the Caribbean. I'm talking about bloodthirsty savages who've been here for hundreds of years, worship foreign deities, and who want to destroy everything we love and hold dear. Dude, you can't say that about the Quebecois. That's racist. God damn it! Hi, General Brock. My Indian troops and I sure are excited to slaughter General Hull and every last American under his command. Wait, is that a real American Indian? Ah! I surrender! Okay, they didn't really meet. Brock just sent a letter, which makes it all the more pathetic when Hull surrendered after reading it. Thus, on August 16, 1812, America's General Hull surrendered his army of 2,000 men, Fort Detroit, and functionally the whole rest of the Michigan territory with them to General Brock and his much smaller force. The British commander then rushed east to deal with another American invasion. After Hull let fear drive his army into disaster, General Dearborn's first prong was finally ready to launch its offensive across the Niagara River in October, not far from the scenic falls. The plan was for 300 regulars to make the crossing and drive away the British pickets. Then, another 800 regulars and roughly 2,600 New York State militia would rendezvous so they could all take the city of Queenston together. On the early morning of October 15th, everything went according to plan. American regulars crossed the river, scaled the escarpment, and defeated the small British force waiting for them. But when it was time for the rest of the army to cross, nearly all of the militia refused, citing the fact their obligations technically ended at the border. But the real issue was that they all came from Federalist states that opposed the war. They had no intention of helping any more than they had to. The regulars on the Canadian side of the river were left to be overrun by British forces led by Brock. Though victorious, the British general was shot in the chest and killed during the battle. Between Hull's surrender and the failure at Queenston, the rather cautious Dearborn chose to cancel the other two planned offensives. What once seemed a mere matter of marching was quickly devolving into a protracted conflict for North America. As America's army squandered its advantages on land, the US Navy exceeded all expectations. Obviously, it could never prevent a British blockade of North America, but it wasn't supposed to. Its heavy frigates were specially designed to be more powerful than any frigate in Europe, but still speedy enough to outrun full-sized ships of the line. So even as the Royal Navy cut off American trade, the nation's warships harassed British trade right back, and defeated every frigate who tried to stop them. The British Admiralty was forced to order their captains to avoid duels with Americans, and always travel in pairs. Though Britannia was destined to rule the waves of the Atlantic, control of the Great Lakes was contested. Both sides raced to build fleets capable of dominating the strategically important Lakes Erie and Ontario. This made Hull's surrender a particularly nasty setback for the Americans, because it allowed the British to blockade America's flotilla at Presque Isle. The army would have to make something happen on land before the fleet would have a chance to retake Lake Erie. Hull and Dearborn's failures forced the Democratic Republicans to look outside the party and to a new generation for military leadership. William Henry Harrison, of Tippecanoe fame, was called up to replace Hull in the Northwest. It only made sense to send the staunch Democratic Republican to defeat Tecumseh and his Indian Confederacy a second time. But before he could do that, Harrison had to rebuild the Northwestern Army left in ruins by Hull's mismanagement. One of Harrison's most important decisions was the construction of a fortified supply line across Ohio to support future offensives. Though not everyone was so eager to get along with the program. Don't worry, Mom. As soon as we defeat the British, we'll get you home safe and sound.
It's okay, son. I trust you.
Urgent report, General Harrison, sir. Are the British attacking? Worse, it's our own men. They're tearing down the fort for firewood. What? Oh my God, they're ruining everything. You idiots! We're literally surrounded by woods. They really are taking everything. The walls, the pickets, the gate, even the furniture. The furniture? Mom, no! Going into 1813, Harrison's Northwest Army emerged from the brutal cold and frequent skirmishes a renewed force, but it still couldn't accomplish anything until control was retaken over Lake Erie. Eager to retake the initiative after the failure of their first invasions, 2,700 newly raised regulars and militia crossed Lake Ontario to raid Upper Canada's capital at York. Though they easily captured the town, several dozen men and their commander were killed when a hidden powder magazine exploded. Believing it was a trap, the Americans burned the town in reprisal. This raid was far more consequential than the Americans expected. York turned out to be a key stop in the British supply lines. The loss of the town forced the British squadron blockading Presque Isle to withdraw, allowing the Americans to complete the construction of their fleet and launch it under the command of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. On September 10, 1813, Perry's flotilla met the British at Put-in Bay. The American Commodore moved aggressively to close the gap and take full advantage of his fleet's superior close-range firepower, but lost his flagship in the process. Unperturbed, Perry got into a lifeboat, rowed to the next ship in his line, and despite having just done the same to his own vessel, raised a flag reading, "Don't give up the ship," the words of an old friend. His fleet complied and defeated the British in a brutal 15-minute exchange. Back on land, Harrison received a simple message from Commodore Perry: "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." The general acted quickly, marching his army to retake Fort Detroit. When they arrived, Harrison discovered that the British and Tecumseh already abandoned Detroit, leaving a large cache of supplies behind them. Harrison pursued them deep into Ontario, catching them at the Thames River on October 5, 1813. With the British and naval forces exhausted and underfed, the battle was hardly a contest. Less than half of the British army escaped, while Tecumseh and his warriors fought to the end. The Northwest Confederacy ended with them. America's Secretary for War, John Armstrong Jr., wanted to follow up the victories around Lake Erie with a two-prong offensive targeting Montreal, which would have seriously compromised Britain's ability to defend Western Canada. But his plan would be foiled by an unfortunate selection for leadership: General James Wilkinson. To Americans, James Wilkinson was another proud veteran of the Revolutionary War. But to the Spanish Crown, he was Agent 13, a spy who'd been on their payroll for decades. Serving directly under Wilkinson was the far more loyal Winfield Scott, an ambitious young officer who saw action at Queenston Heights and York. He had known of Wilkinson's treachery for years, but could never quite prove it. Though Spain's precipitous decline in the Napoleonic Wars meant Wilkinson was no longer on their payroll, he continued sabotaging American interests for his own enigmatic reasons. Wilkinson's advance toward Montreal was supposedly plagued by logistical chaos, illness, and indecision before fizzling out in late 1813. A furious Scott rushed to the capital, where he blamed the failure on Wilkinson's machinations straight to Secretary Armstrong. Scott also took the opportunity to suggest much-needed reforms to the army in the style of Napoleonic France. The Secretary for War was so impressed that he promoted 27-year-old Scott to Brigadier General and sent him back to the Northern Front to train and lead troops in his new methods. Scott's brigade performed well in the subsequent 1814 Niagara Campaign, which saw some of the war's heaviest fighting. But the campaign ended inconclusively, meaning Wilkinson's perfidy lost America its last serious chance to conquer Canada. Back in Europe, the French Emperor Napoleon had abdicated, freeing Britain's best armies and fleets to focus solely on North America. And the British had their own ideas for how they wanted to end the war. To Americans, the War of 1812 was an essential fight to secure their vital national interests. To the British, it was a very inconvenient distraction from their own life-or-death struggle against Napoleon. The French Emperor's abdication in April 1814 allowed them to turn the American sideshow into the main attraction. In September, 3,000 troops invaded and occupied disputed territory in Maine. But the real work was to be done by the 16,000 Peninsular War veterans shipped in from Europe, closely supported by the Royal Navy. One army under General Prevost planned to invade New York up the Richelieu River. But before it could get underway, Admiral Alexander Cochrane and General Robert Ross sailed into Chesapeake Bay with 5,000 men intent on raiding Baltimore and America's capital at Washington. With the Navy too weak to contest the landing, coastal defenses poorly manned, and most of the regular army fighting in Canada, America's federal government struggled to put together a defense of Washington. The only significant forces in the area were state militias, who'd rather defend their own homes than the nation's capital. Secretary of War Armstrong scratched together a few thousand troops and set up a defense at Bladensburg, Maryland. But before the British attacked, his rival, Secretary of State James Monroe, without any proper authority, showed up and issued new orders designed to sabotage the defenses. Monroe hoped Armstrong would be blamed for the disaster, so he could take the job of Secretary of War for himself. General Ross's Napoleonic War veterans had little difficulty sweeping aside the unfortunate Americans and marching into Washington. For the second time, a British army occupied an American capital. To avenge the burning of Upper Canada's capital at York, Ross's army burned Washington right back. But the worst of the damage was prevented when a freak tornado suddenly swept through the city, snuffing out the fires and killing several British soldiers in the process. Nonetheless, the British got what they came for and prepared to move on to the real prize, Baltimore. As for our scheming Secretary of State, James Monroe's plot totally worked. Armstrong was sacked, and Monroe made Secretary of War and Secretary of State at the same time. Can you believe this guy went on to become the 5th president? While letting Washington burn was embarrassing, the loss of Baltimore would have had a serious material impact on the war. Baltimore was America's 4th largest city and a center of privateering and trade. On September 12, 1814, Ross's army landed on the North Point Peninsula to begin their advance. But the resistance here was much more intense than around Washington, with militia harassing their whole advance. Ah, what a great day for killing Americans, right guys? Sir, the scouts are reporting more militia ahead. Ha! I don't care if it rains militia. Huh, sounds like a storm is coming. Ooh, I think that was the American militia, sir. Well, I did say I didn't care. The British attack continued until they met the Americans at North Point. Though the British won the field, the Americans retreated to their fortifications in good order, so the army decided it could not attempt an assault without support from the Navy, which was held up by Fort McHenry. As Admiral Cochrane prepared the bombardment, he was joined on board by the American Francis Scott Key, who was there to request the release of a prisoner. Unable to leave until after the fighting ended, Key anxiously watched the 25-hour rocket and mortar bombardment of the fort. By the time it was over, Key knew the fort was still in American hands by the massive 15-star, 15-stripe American storm flag still flying defiant. The incident inspired Key to write a poem that would later become America's national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. The failure to take Fort McHenry forced the British to pull back to their ships and consider their next moves. The two most promising options seemed to be Newport, Rhode Island, and fatefully, the former French city of New Orleans. Both Britain and America considered making peace as early as spring 1814. America's population was growing exhausted by the blockades and fighting. The Federalists were madder than ever at an endless war which seemed like it was only started to spite them. The British, meanwhile, had little to gain from continued fighting, and preferred to focus on the post-war order in Europe. Peace negotiations began in neutral Ghent that August. For such important talks, the United States naturally sent its best diplomats and statesmen. The British, however, already sent their best men to Vienna to negotiate the post-war settlement in Europe. This left only second-rate diplomats to talk to the Americans. Both delegations were instructed by their governments to work toward a status quo ante bellum, a return to the pre-war conditions. But England's delegates, hoping to make a name for themselves, ignored those orders and pursued a different strategy. Alright guys, what should we demand from the Americans? Think big here. This is our chance to become famous. How about a favorable settlement along the Maine border? That's good. Ooh, the best diplomats don't take territory directly, but make buffer states. Let's force them to recognize the Northwest Confederacy. I like it. We should take away their Grand Banks fishing rights too. Now for leverage. Our armies haven't been doing the best lately, so how can we force the Americans to give in? Guys, the Duke of Wellington is my cousin. I'll ask him to threaten to go to America. That'll scare the garter socks off of him. Are you crazy? I'm not going to America. And you're like my 8th cousin. Get out of my house. Bad news, guys. It's okay. We just got a report from General Prevost. He finally got his army moving and fought the Americans at Plattsburgh. I'm sure he won us a massive victory. It says here that Prevost achieved the complete annihilation of the British forces at Plattsburgh? Oh no! Things aren't looking good, guys. Maybe we should moderate our demands. Is there anything flashy we can still ask for so people will think we did a good job? We could ask America for a pony. Genius! Between the failures at Baltimore, Plattsburgh, and demands from London to just get on with it, the British and American delegations signed the Treaty of Ghent on December 24, 1814, stipulating a return to the status quo ante bellum. But it would take time for the treaty to cross the Atlantic for ratification by the US Senate. Before that could happen, Cochrane's fleet would arrive at the next target it had chosen, New Orleans. With all of the best American commanders and troops in the north, who would be available to defend the city and its vital control of the Mississippi. On August 30th, 1813, radical traditionalist Creek known as the Red Sticks attacked Fort Mims, Alabama, slaughtering its entire garrison and settler population. This was the culmination of a crisis within the Creek Nation and scheming from Spain and Great Britain. Years of trade, intermarriage, and influence from American agents was slowly assimilating much of the lower Creek of western Georgia into American culture. But this upset the more traditionalist Upper Creek, who despised the Western influence. They formed the Red Sticks faction to resist it. In 1813, with the Americans distracted by their war in the North, and the Red Sticks promised support from Great Britain and Spain, the traditionalists made their move. After initiating a civil war by attacking Lower Creek villages, the Red Sticks declared war on America with their massacre at Fort Mims. From nearby Tennessee, Major General Andrew Jackson was sent to help fight them. A lawyer and Democratic Republican politician by trade, Jackson raised and trained his army from scratch, mostly out of militia and volunteers outraged by the Fort Mims massacre. Though a strict disciplinarian, the soldiers grew quite fond of Old Hickory, who held himself up to the same harsh standards. Jackson's campaign was plagued by a lack of food, poor equipment, and high turnover of militia from their short enlistment periods. At one point, he had to threaten his own officers at gunpoint, and at others, paid for supplies out of his own pocket. But his Red Stick enemies weren't much better off. The promised support from Great Britain and Spain turned out to be little more than weapons and a tiny British detachment that didn't even arrive on time. On March 27, 1814, Jackson led a combined American, Cherokee, and Creek force against the Red Sticks fortified at Horseshoe Bend, where he decisively defeated them. In retaliation for the Fort Mims massacre, the Americans joined their native allies in killing the last of the Red Stick warriors alongside their women and children. Then, on August 9th, Jackson forced the Creek, including those allied with America, to sign the Treaty of Fort Jackson, ceding 20 million acres to the United States. Then, on his own initiative, Jackson invaded Spanish West Florida to punish it for supplying the Red Sticks, capturing its capital of Pensacola on November 9th. These victories won Jackson a strong reputation with the US government. So as the British expedition approached New Orleans, Washington knew exactly who it wanted leading its defense. While the British delegation in Ghent couldn't convince the Duke of Wellington to go to America, his brother-in-law, Major General Edward Pakenham, happened to be the leader of the army attacking New Orleans, serving directly under Admiral Cochrane. The fleet arrived off the coast of Louisiana on December 9, 1814. Jackson arrived a few days earlier on the 1st, and immediately set about building an army to defend the city. Though there were no British massacres to entice volunteers, Jackson built his army out of regulars, militia, free blacks, Native Americans, volunteers, and even a local pirate troop in return for pardons. The coming Battle of New Orleans would prove a regrettable misadventure for both sides. The British only wanted the city as a bargaining chip for their peace talks. But, unaware that Ghent was already crossing the Atlantic, Pakenham followed his orders to campaign as aggressively as possible, unless specific confirmation was received of its ratification. The Americans, meanwhile, feared that Britain's real goal was to take control of the Mississippi River Valley, a prize they believed so precious the British might continue to occupy New Orleans even after Ghent, on the grounds the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon had never been recognized by Great Britain, which they could argue would technically still be in line with the peace terms. Jackson's improvised army dug in along a canal south of the city, but Pakenham's reconnaissance mistakenly believed they were not so well fortified, and prepared a frontal assault for the foggy morning of January 8, 1815. All right, men, don't shoot until you can see the whites of their eyes. I thought that quote was from Bunker Hill. I said wait, damn it! I think I can see them. Wait for it. They're getting awful close, sir. Wait for it. They're practically on top of us, sir. I said wait, damn it! Ah! I said wait! Unfortunately for the British, the fog lifted right as they got close to the Americans, making it easy for the American cannons and small arms to rip them apart. In a battle lasting less than an hour, the British suffered 2,000 casualties, including 2 generals and Pakenham himself. The Americans only lost 62 men. Thanks to New Orleans, the proud Americans could boast, "We beat the men who beat Napoleon."
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored.
In February 1815, the Treaty of Ghent was ratified, ending the War of 1812 in a status quo ante bellum. At least on paper. Ghent only applied to its signatories, the United States and Great Britain. America kept what it took from the Creek and Spanish, including Pensacola and Mobile, the latter of which, oddly enough, was captured from Spain by their own former spy, James Wilkinson, back in 1813. Though Ghent stipulated a return to pre-war conditions, the terms of Ghent could not bring Tecumseh or his Northwestern Confederacy back to life, nor unconvince the British to adopt a new policy of appeasement toward the Americans, to avoid having to fight another costly war for the relatively poor provinces of Canada. With Spain ruined by the Napoleonic Wars, the last barriers to American dominance of North America were gone. And, though having nothing to do with the War of 1812, Napoleon's defeat in Europe reopened both France and Great Britain to American trade. In sum, the War of 1812 was really a victory for the Americans, though not the total British rout the most hawkish Americans hoped would allow them to annex Canada. Instead of the North, America's gains were in the South, fertile soil for the expansion of slavery. Within the United States, the national political rift was mended by the unexpected self-destruction of the Federalist Party. Unaware that the Ghent Peace Treaty was crossing the Atlantic, or that Andrew Jackson was about to win a major victory at New Orleans, the Federalists gathered in Hartford, Connecticut to consider extreme political measures, including secession. Instead of going that far, the party chose to exploit the war's apparent unpopularity to force constitutional reforms highly favorable to their party. These included limiting any trade embargoes to 60 days, requiring 2/3 of Congress to declare war, admit new states, or interdict foreign commerce, overturning the 3/5 compromise that favored the southern slave states, imposing a one-term limit on the presidency, and, upset that 3 of America's 4 presidents were Virginians, require that presidents come from different states than their predecessors. Unfortunately for the Federalists, their demands reached the Capitol in February. By then, the war's unpopularity was replaced by celebrations of peace and Jackson's spectacular victory at New Orleans. Instead of destroying the Democratic Republicans, the Hartford Convention made the Federalists look like traitors. Support for the party collapsed, reducing the Federalists to a local party in New England before fading into complete irrelevance. Many former Federalists wound up joining the Democratic Republicans, so instead of a new opposition party replacing the Federalists, America's politics were transformed into a one-party system under the Democratic Republican Party's increasingly massive tent. These years of political unity became known as the Era of Good Feelings, sometimes with bitter irony. The era saw new states added to the Union by American settlers who poured into the south and western frontiers. They included many veterans claiming the land they were promised for their service. As political power shifted away from the Atlantic and the founding generation aged out of power, a new political landscape emerged. The American people were no longer interested in classics, law, and philosophy. Political experience and life on the frontier made them into populists, pragmatists, and expansionists, eager to spread the nation's borders to the Pacific coast, regardless of who or what stood in their way. No longer skeptical of standing armies or powerful executives, the American people elected charismatic, strong-willed, and often militarily experienced presidents to lead them. Men like Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison, who made their names fighting the War of 1812. The seeds of manifest destiny had been planted. But the good times couldn't last. It turned out consolidating all of American politics into a single massive Democratic-Republican Party was not a stable arrangement. Political disputes turned into internal battles within the party until the oversized tent collapsed under the weight of ideological differences and regional interests. Two new parties emerged to replace it, the Whigs and the Democrats. Like the Federalists of old, the Whigs believed strongly in elitist federal power. They wanted a strong central government elected by a limited franchise to create a national bank, build new infrastructure, and implement protective tariffs. Their Democratic opponents fully embraced populism, seeking to expand the franchise and prevent the Whigs' vision of a strong federal government, preferring to leave power with the many new states joining the Union. Though the Whigs wouldn't last, this Democrat Party is the very same party that continues to dominate American politics to this day, making the Democrats the oldest still operational political party on Earth. The competing national visions of Enlightenment farmers and influential coastal merchants faded away. Replacing them were battles between northern industrialists, southern plantation owners, and ambitious frontier settlers in the West. These new Americans no longer fought over what the country was. Their new vitalistic republic struggled to determine what it was going to become. And that's how the War of 1812 ended the Enlightenment in America. Since you watched this far, leave a Canadian moose emoji in the comments as a secret message to everyone else who got here too. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, the Quality Time Beard Shaping Template Kit. Skip the expensive trip to the barber and do it yourself from home. Get your kit via the link in the description and pinned comment, and use our exclusive code Ezekiel1 to get 15% off your order. You'll also find links to where you can get our summer collection for 10% off, and our Patreon, where you can support these videos directly. Thanks again to Hero Tonfa for the cool art. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one. These videos would be impossible without our supporters on Patreon, including our Into Space supporters, Commissar Bragg, Duke Nelson, Feline Man, G Money, GS Rogers, Josiah, Micro, Pater, Petri von Steiff, and the Raven Union.